Hello, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me. Today I'm really excited because I'm going to be talking to Peter Whittle from the New Culture Forum. For me, he is very famous because of his YouTube channel, What You're Saying Is. Peter, welcome to my channel and thank you very much for joining me.
Welcome. Sorry, I should say thank you very
No,
much.
that's all
Uh,
right.
it's
Uh,
actually the channel is the New Culture Forum,
oh, the channel is the New Culture
yeah,
Forum and the
and
video, the
the show is
series.
called, yeah, the show is called "So What You're Saying Is," which actually came about because I don't know if you remember, but it was 4 years ago. Channel 4, Kathy Newman, did this interview with Jordan Peterson, and it became quite notorious. In fact, it's had 40 million views because in it he got the better of her, but she was obviously aiming to demolish him. But what happens? She kept on saying in it. So what you're saying is,
Yes,
so what you're saying is, so what you're saying is, um,
paraphrasing everything he said, wasn't it?
everything.
With a
And
bias.
yeah, exactly. And nine times out of ten, he wasn't saying that.
No.
But anyway, so we decided to call the programs "What You're Saying Is." Yeah.
And I have to say, it's a fantastic series on arts, culture, Great Britain, and you have some amazing guests on your show, including Roger Scruton,
Yeah.
who sadly passed away recently. And you bring a side of Great Britain, the thinkers, and the discussions that you have in the long format that you do in a way that you no longer get on television and mainstream media.
I mean, I
And
think
you,
I believe you were in television, weren't you, at one point, Richard? I was too. That was my work for a long time, and I was still in television in the nineties, early part of this century, when you still have people like Brian Walton, and when you think about it, there were programs called Weekend World, for example, and it used to go on for like 40 minutes with one person.
yes,
Sort of unthinkable. If you go back even later, before that, uh, there was a wonderful program called Face to Face with John Freeman in the 1960s. And he used to have people like Evelyn Waugh and
Tony
Edith,
Hancock, didn't Tony Hancock appear on that?
I think he did, yeah, and Gilbert Harding and these people. I mean, and it was just, you never saw John Freeman's face in it.
No.
You can see all of this on YouTube, which is one of the great things about YouTube now. But
Yes.
that sort of format has really gone. Absolutely, yes.
It's a shame. However, we have, as you say, YouTube, in which people like Jordan Peterson, as you mentioned earlier on, have these very long. I mean, he does 2 hour podcasts on YouTube, but he really drills down. Obviously a very clever man, and he drills down, has some amazing guests, and YouTube is obviously a fantastic medium for exactly what we're doing today. So I just wanted to, for those people who do not know you, Peter, and I don't know why they wouldn't, but you're an author, a journalist, a politician, and a presenter. You were a part of you served as a member of the London Assembly.
That's right. Yes.
And I remember watching you putting your points. You had to do it all through Zoom,
Oh,
which seemed so tedious, and I could see you getting so frustrated with the mayor at the
yeah.
time. You were also a deputy leader of UKIP,
Yep.
on board then with Brexit,
Yeah.
and all of that. And you've written some books, of which I've been hunting around for the one I have of yours, which I bought some years ago,
Yes.
Being British and What's Wrong with It,
Oh, good,
which
good.
is a fantastic. And I love the list at the back where
Yes.
you say, off the top of my head, here's a few things that Britain is really good for, and it was such a lovely list. And I was hoping that I could wave it up at the camera and say, "Oh, I've got your book," but I've got down in the main part of my house, I've got loads of books, and it's just I don't know where it is, to be honest with you. But it's a fantastic. I recommend it. Can I start with another book, which I haven't read, I confess, called Look at Me, Celebrating Self, that you wrote? We seem to be in the current era where we are very obsessed with ourselves, and Instagram, TikTok, and all that sort of really shows that off. Why do you suppose that is?
It's a very good question. I mean, yes, the book was all about that, about the age of narcissism, which in fact I think has only accelerated. Um, since then, I think that was I wrote that about 2008. And it's not an original subject. I mean, people have been looking at it more and more. I think one of the reasons would be that I say in the book is this strange sort of what I would think is a rather toxic alliance between the sort of 60s, do what you want to do, let it all hang out. You are a wonderful creative being. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. No boundaries. And also, on the other hand, the liberal economic trend that we've seen, which sees everyone as a kind of single economic unit.
Right.
And I think that has had a kind of strange, possibly not even intended effect of producing narcissism. Also, it is the death of, the collective things around us. So, for example, religion, a belief in the country, even a belief in community, locality. In some ways, it's also been defined by David Goodhart, the writer, as a difference. He called people in the context of Brexit somewheres and anywheres. The anywhere people were sort of people who didn't really have ties anywhere, very individualistic, could live anywhere in the world, made a virtue of it. The somewheres were people, and I count myself as one, who think that your context is incredibly important and it's part of your character, whether you like it or not.
Mm.
So I think that people who have a strong sense of where they are and a strong sense of being part of something bigger tend not to be as narcissistic. And the other thing, so that's two things. And I think the other thing, really, Richard, is that people have been infantilized. And essentially, children are narcissistic. They're meant to be when they're young. It's all about their appetites, what they want,
Yes.
and they want it now. And that has now basically entered sort of adulthood. I mean, it's entered the mainstream society. So I think there are very powerful trends to make us narcissistic. I would say, by the way, we're talking about the West.
Yes.
We always make that point simply because it doesn't apply in huge numbers of other countries, in fact, probably most of the world. I'm talking about the West, and particularly the English speaking West.
So you mentioned there about people who are somewhere, and as you say, you consider yourself, and I very much consider myself somewhere, and I'm very proud of being somewhere. And yet, I think we're pretty similar ages, being grown up in the 60s,
Careful.
through the late 60s, obviously, somewhere like that. But that sort of time, I think I was a kid, so I was growing up. I felt part of the country. I felt that this was my home. The people I looked around were similar to me. We all spoke the same language. We shared the same customs, traditions, and values. And somehow, as I've got older, and that to me is a benchmark. As you grow up, you always seem to. Well, I found I've always referring back to those days, those halcyon days of my childhood, and then things progress and things have changed, but they seem to be changing at such an alarming rate that, and I'm sure this is the same with many of my viewers. Well, in fact, I know it is over the years of doing my heritage stuff. People have looked back and said, what's happened to the country? Because we don't seem to be very proud of our country anymore. We don't seem to be proud of our history. And there seems to be a hollowing out of who we are. Would you agree with that?
Without question. I think there are a number of different paths there. You say growing up in the 1960s and 70s, same here. Kid in the 60s, teenager in the 70s. I would say that the 1980s were about the last time, maybe into the 90s, when we were culturally intact. I think, we're hearing a lot at the moment about, oh, this is very much like the 70s. What we're going through now is a bit like the 1970s. Well,
Because of the strikes and things, you mean?
because of the strikes
Yes.
and the general sense of decline.
Right.
And I think that while it might seem superficially the case, the big difference is that then we still had a very strong sense of who we were.
Yes.
And I think that carried on into the 80s. I think it's basically in the past 25 years that that has fragmented at an alarming rate. But you only have to look at, you know, old clips, again, our friend YouTube here, go and look at old television shows, things like that. It's not just about them being sort of less politically correct and all of that. It's not so much that. It's just that there were more assumptions made that were based on us all having a collective identity and also collective set of beliefs, maybe. Um, what I think has happened is that that has fragmented. What you're seeing now is, I'd say, more than, you say we're not proud of our history anymore, our society. I would say the majority of people probably are.
Mm.
But the people who have influence and power are not. And essentially, you can see what amounts to what seems like an everyday attack on that history, on the character of British society. I would say there's an aim to delegitimize our history. So it's more than just, it used to be that conservative people say, oh, well, we don't go in for flag waving. We don't go in for those kind of very bombastic displays like the Americans maybe do. And that was once maybe true, but it was based on a sense of not having to.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. We knew who we were.
yes, that's gone. I don't think it's entirely just coincidental. I think a lot of it is intentional. And what we're seeing now, like in 2023, is the most extraordinary, as I said, a regular attack at the very foundations of our society and our culture. I mean, whether it's on racial issues, whether it's on sexual issues, trans, things like that, and indeed on the very subjects that we teach kids, universities, everything is pretty much under attack. And there appears to be very little pushback, even though people are very angry about this.
But why is that? I mean, as you said, it seems to be a minority who are pushing. The majority seem to be very happy to, not happy, but they are very quiet. So, as you say, I think people do believe in their country, but for some reason they keep quiet. They just keep their heads down. They want to keep their jobs. They don't want to say the wrong thing. And every day there seems to be more wrong things that you can put your foot into. But what is the end purpose of this?
Well, dear, you see, the thing is, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Um, I don't believe that people sat, in a room and formed a committee and said we're going to do this. But
Right.
you don't have to have a committee in a way. You can still have a very effective attack on something, and I think that's what we've been seeing. We've done a lot of work here at the New Culture Forum. In fact, we produced a book a couple of years ago on it called The Long March. And it was essentially looking at this idea that if you go back to the beginnings with Marxism, I'm being very crude here for brevity's sake,
Yeah,
but
sure.
essentially, some Marxists saw that, well, actually, working class people appear not to be rebelling in the streets in the way that we would like. So, basically, one sort of school of thought called the Frankfurt School basically said, right, we've got to actually go in and hollow the institutions out, from the inside out. And it was called by some of these activists in the 60s the Long March, right? The Long March to the institutions. So when you talk about our country being hollowed out, I mean, that's really what I'm talking about. It's being done via our institutions. So whether it's education, whether it's our museums, whether it is indeed the civil service, the church, the judiciary. Essentially, I would say that it is political. But when you sort of ask me, it's a small number of people. Why is it? How come? Well, yes, of course. In terms of numericals, that is quite a small number of people. Actually, it's just that they're very, very influential.
Yes.
They all tend to think the same thing. Again, I don't mean they all got together and decided to do this.
No.
You don't have to have that, but you can exert extraordinary influence on a society. If you sing from the same hymn sheet, we don't have anyone politically pushing back on that, least of all the Conservative Party, I'm afraid, which doesn't conserve a thing.
No.
Not just that, but actually accepts all this. So people are utterly bewildered. I remember, during the period of Black Lives Matter, it's like 2020, which I don't know what you feel, but or your viewers, Richard, but for me, that was one of the worst years I can remember. I mean, not only did we have the pandemic, but we had this sudden attack, Churchill being vandalized, the statue of Churchill being vandalized, statues coming down, virtually every institution, right down to Kew Gardens, coming out and saying we're decolonizing and all. And you sort of thought it was utterly bewildering. So the people who watched the New Culture Forum, they would sort of get in touch, and you could tell that they were angry and they were utterly bewildered by what was happening, because really what it was is that people's context, their what we call their hinterland in a way, was essentially being robbed out.
Yes. I found. I mean, the statues thing and the arguments for it just seems so. There didn't seem an argument for it, and suddenly everything was, and the pushback was so limited. It does seem as if I mean, I know you're saying not a conspiracy theorist, but you can see why people feel that there is, and then the next generation are coming up thinking this is the way, and there is no pushback, with the National Trust suddenly having to explain everything because of the obsession with slavery, but only the transatlantic slavery, not not slavery in the bigger picture of all of it.
No, it is historically illiterate, most of it, and also it is politically motivated. If you can sort of delegitimize people's history, their backstory, then in a way, you're halfway to kind of basically getting control, getting power over them. And I think that really is what's been happening. And as I said, unfortunately, at the moment, there appears not to be a party that basically people can vote for to register, their opposition to this. I do think in the end, you see, you've got to give people something to vote for, because otherwise, all they're left doing is maybe shouting at the television. I know I would be like that if I weren't active in this area. But I think that one can't emphasize this enough. It has been a quite extraordinary, at extraordinary speed as well. Don't forget that essentially from about 2020, each individual institution in this country suddenly sort of came out with exactly the same thing. The British Library, we're decolonizing our collection. The British Library, which is like, I'd say like the spine of our culture, the British Museum, all of these institutions. And I think you alluded to it there, and it's by far the most important, is education. What is it? Something like, I think it's 80% of young people would have voted for Labour, for example. Now, if it had just been down to young people, in fact, in that case, we would be having a Labour government all the time. Now, how can that happen? Actually, I mean, regardless of how you vote, something is going on there. They all tend to think. I think it was something like 40% thought that Britain was structurally racist. As you say, they certainly therefore don't feel proud And so this is something at the New Culture Forum, which we are really going to major on this year, and that is kind of young people. And essentially, there are some great young people around. I don't want to be all doom laden. There are some fantastic people who somehow managed to slip through the net of the indoctrination, people who really think for themselves. And, I'm terribly encouraged by that. But they've got to be helped out because, frankly, if you're young now and, you're living in this atmosphere, it must make you feel very alone, you know?
Yes.
Well, all of us actually. I think people sort of think, wait a minute, am I the only one that thinks this is crazy? Am I the only one? But you say, why do those people not push back? I would say is that, frankly, I think they're nervous of pushing back.
Do you think? I mean, in the past we had the mainstream media, and I say in the past because I don't think the next generation are really paying much attention to mainstream. They might be watching some Netflix programs that are, very sexy and what have you, but it seems to me that most of the younger people are on social media, on platforms like YouTube and all the other video platforms out there, that although the mainstream media has been and still is extremely biased in its way, that might not affect the next generation coming up because they can circumnavigate that, if you like.
What if they're being taught things at school?
Well, yes, okay, through that way, but there's got to, as you say, I'm just thinking that if they're being taught that through school, I remember when I was taught stuff, we rebelled against whatever the establishment was, and I just wonder, and I suppose this is hope that young people behave as young people always do and say, well, that's now the established view of all this wokery, victimhood, slavery, and actually that they will do the reverse and actually think about having an identity, conserving the nation. Do you think that's a possibility?
I
Is
think
that
it's
too optimistic?
No, I think it's a possibility. All I would say is that you're talking very long term
Right.
because such a number has been done on them. I mean, if on the one hand you're not only sort of indoctrinated in education at schools, but also the general culture around you is telling you one thing.
Mm.
Um, and then, and this is really not to be underestimated, you simply don't know what it is you're meant to be conserving, that you
Yes.
haven't really been taught much about your history, that you haven't been taught about the extraordinary and special things about this country. So,
Yes. No, I can see. No, you make an absolutely valid point there. If you don't know, you see, I'm talking from a man who's approaching his 60s and has all that knowledge and thinking, why would you not push against that? But you're absolutely right. If you don't know and you've not had that sense and your parents perhaps have been in a bit of a one way or another, you're right. How important, I mean, and this is going to be a very obvious question, but people may not have considered this, but how important is our culture to us as people?
well, what else is there? I mean, it's the most important thing. I mean, I think
Then in
culture,
that case, why, if it's the most important thing, why are people not hanging on to it for dear life?
but I think that they sort of are trying to.
Right.
They're trying to. But the problem is that if you have the guardians of that culture and that history essentially trying to undermine it, it makes it incredibly difficult. You
Yes.
mentioned the national trust there.
Mm.
I find, for example, I love going and seeing historical things, houses and such like, to take that as an example. But the fact is, I now go in with a slight amount of trepidation because I sort of think, hang on, you know, I know I'm going to be made to feel angry.
Hmm.
I know that when I go into this building or this country house, whatever it is, I'm going to kind of be told what I should think about my country. The bad things will be accentuated. This is happening all over now, not just the National Trust, but it's happening in galleries, it's happening in art exhibitions, all of those things. sometimes incredibly tenuously. They absolutely kind of root around for the most tenuous link to slavery, for example. We've had these crazy situations where I think it was Ted Hughes, the poet, a while ago, was even linked to slavery because some relative of his 300 years ago had been involved in the slave trade. There is a reason behind this, and it is essentially to destabilize confidence in it. So, what do you do in that situation? I would say, well, I'm afraid I increasingly don't go to things. Now,
Right.
you might say that's a real counsel of despair, but if you are, I will not be talked to. I will not be told what to think. I'm sure you're the same.
Mm.
So the only way to do it is to remove yourself from that situation. Um, I think that people do hold on to it, do try to hold on to their culture in different ways. I mean, I remember my parents, for example, uh, ordinary people, my late parents, they in their in their 60s, I'd say, 50s, 60s, they started to call themselves English. I know an English YouTube channel, don't you? I don't
Mm.
know, are we doing that one now, or but you do go into those issues a lot, don't you? And they started calling themselves English as opposed to British. They always had called themselves British. And I think it was a desire to hold on to something which they felt was being taken away. So, for example, if everyone can be British now, then you could say, well, then nobody's British. So, you know,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
so
Whereas not everybody can be English.
that's right. And I suppose so. And I think that, I refer to myself as English, definitely now with
Mm.
people, I'm English. And I think that the English, as I'm sure you've talked about a lot, come in for a particular bad rap. And I think there are reasons for that. Possibly, I think one of them being is that they're the majority in these islands. Um,
Not that you would think. Not that I mean, when you watch the television, white middle class men like you and I in adverts are never. We don't exist. We've
well,
been evaporated.
if we do exist, then we are kind of there for comic relief.
Yes. Yes.
But
Absolutely.
I think that because people feel they can't do anything, because can't can't stress this enough. A lot is at stake. I mean, if people want to push back, they're more nervous now. They think, well, wait a minute, I might get censored. I might lose my job.
Mm.
All sorts of things, and so therefore, because on the New Culture Forum channel, we talk a lot to people who have sort of, if you like, fought back on various issues like free speech and all of that. But they tend to be, they've become quite high profile. For
Mm.
most people, it's a question of actually on a day-to-day level, and they have to pay their mortgage, they have to provide for their family. It's not easy. Um, I think the one big thing about that I would say one of the huge, you know, wonderful and heroic moments, I think, of pushing back was in fact the Brexit votes.
Mm.
Whether one's, a Remainer or a Leaver, all of that, um, it was still profoundly, I thought, inspiring that it showed the power of people, through the ballot box.
And
They will be
the shock from the other side.
the shock, which they've never got over and never will. And they
Mm.
will keep on and on and on. But essentially, 17 million people came together. And they had been told systematically by all the institutions of our country that, in fact, we're nothing. We're nothing without being in the EU, for example.
Mm.
And they said, well, and in fact, not only that, but, this will happen and that will happen. Um, Now, obviously, the way that Brexit has been treated since then is another whole issue. We could go into, but what I mean is that showed the strength of feeling on that issue. That was people saying enough,
Enough is enough. Um,
and I think that was inspiring.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and people, I think we've got to hold on to that and remember that basically half the country really were able to speak, and it did people hadn't even considered. You know, the Westminster bubble hadn't considered that we were going to disagree with them.
Not just Westminster bubble. I think, I mean, all our institutions.
Yes.
I remember, having, as I said, worked in television and the arts for a long time. I think there was a letter written to the Times by all these people in the creative industries, right? All of, there's 90, one of these where they all sign,
Right.
and it was like actors and directors, what have you, designers. And they were, to a man and woman, pro EU, they were saying things like, this country's creative imagination, I'll never forget this phrase, this country's creative imagination will be impoverished if we leave the EU. And I just thought, these are people who are essentially doing things, creative, making films, writing books, etc. And they talk about, our lack of creativity or our impoverished creativity outside the EU. This is the land of Shakespeare. This is the land, I'm pretty sure there wasn't an EU when Shakespeare was around. Dickens, Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, Thomas Hardy, Evelyn Waugh,
Yes.
go on and on and on. I mean, all
incredibly short-sighted.
Incredible, short-sighted, but wrong.
And wrong, yes, absolutely.
Wrong. Yeah.
Looking at the future, our culture and our arts seem to be under threat now from modern technology. We have AI coming down the line, and I think there's something called I can't remember what the letters are, GTP or something. You type into this thing, if you want to cheat on your homework or write an essay for university, you type in the basic thing, and within minutes, there it is. My son showed me, he said, I can take a photograph of you, Dad. You say that you want to be dressed, say an animal of this and of that, and suddenly it will produce, in seconds, an amazing photograph that's very surreal, like one of the surrealist painters have come up with. And you can just type in all these different styles, and there it is. And I think to myself, this is what kids are playing with and think is really cool, that people went to fine art schools to learn and understand the history and get in tune with, and press a button. They're seeing something which is interesting, but seems to be devoid of life and meaning because it's just generated like that. But does that worry you that technology is very much now overtaking particularly the younger people's minds? And
what do you mean? I mean, in terms of like purely the arts, like painting and things like that, you mentioned that.
Well, literature, literacy, the whole thing. It's almost as if we no longer have to achieve anything ourselves because there is an artificial intelligence can do it all for us.
Well, I think that on a broader level, I mean, not just in the arts, but I'm kind of like, I look to the possibilities of AI with a certain amount of horror, actually. But to your point about the creative industries and the creative acts that people no longer will have to do, I would say that literature and painting, music, they have all adapted and all basically survived, well, flourished, even when society's been going through massive changes, technological changes, seemingly nothing to do with it, nothing to do with the arts. However, to return to my theme, there is the most extraordinary attack, and to the point where I think the arts, if not dead, they're on life support. And that is because the woke attack on the creative industry is that essentially only some things are now acceptable to say. The arts are meant to be beacon of free speech, free expression. I was reading an article only recently, and we've had the author Lionel Shriver on the show to talk about this. Publishers, for example, who publish novels or factual books, now have sensitivity readers. I don't know whether you've heard of these people.
I haven't, but it already fills me with horror.
Well, exactly. It's Orwellian, isn't it? Sensitivity readers. These people go through, and they're mostly young people, and essentially they have to make sure that There's not a level of offence in them. But increasingly, it's not just about offence. It is about saying, with the question in your head, well, this is a, say, like a white male author, and yet he's writing about a young Asian woman in the novel,
Right.
something like that.
Yes.
He has no place doing that.
No.
Now, the thing is, you can see where I'm going with this.
Mm.
This will absolutely kill any creativity because the ability to imagine yourself in somebody else's body and character is at the very essence of creativity. It's the very essence of writing a novel. And so essentially, that is killing it. That will kill it. And that's before you even get to the point of saying, well, actually, X and Y simply is not to be tolerated, in this book, this character says this or that or whatever. That's one thing, that's bad enough. But actually, to say, well, you can only write a novel or you can only write about the experiences of this or that person if you are from that group of people.
Yes.
That is actually, that will kill the arts. That will, I mean, anyone who's got anything worth saying, or for that matter, a real talent or whatever, they will be stymied by those kind of things to begin with. So I think, in a way, AI, not exactly the least of our problems, but I mean, we're already going through this now, which I'm afraid. And I think that, it's a source of, absolute, dismay to me. As someone who's always loved reading,
Mm.
I love music, I love opera and ballet, I love movies. I used to be a film critic for 20 years. Increasingly, I don't bother, because in fact, you know what you're going to get.
Yes.
But I think creativity is really, there's a real threat to it there in the arts, in our culture.
That's a huge shame and a blow again for our culture. Before we wrap up, because I'm aware of time and everything, going back to books, and you said you enjoy books. You wrote a book called Monarchy.
Yes.
And I know you're a great royalist. You love the pageantry and all of that. We're coming up now with King Charles to his coronation as we record this, which is fairly soon. And I was talking about this because of stuff that has been going on in the world with things coming down the line from outside of Britain, where people are deciding what our futures are going to be like, without getting into anything too conspiratorial. The oath that the king takes is clearly a very important thing because, and although it's ancient and it's ritual and it is pageantry and it's something to look at, which we do incredibly well in this country, of course. But it is, if it wasn't important, we wouldn't do it. Do you know much about the oath and the reasons and the importance of it?
Well, yes, in the sense that it's sort of enshrined in history. And I mean, I think the whole coronation and the service of coronation is extremely important. We tamper with it at our peril. I think your question might be, what is the monarchy undermining its own position, or
It's well, I put it this way: the king has very much, or as the prince, I should say, correct myself, he launched the Great Reset, and I think there's a question mark about what that really means for everybody, and people are interpreting that in many different ways. We have the threat of climate change, and that seems to be implemented. As a result of that, we're implementing a whole load of policies which nobody's actually voted for or asked for, or by it seems nobody actually wants. Things like these 15-minute cities and restriction of movements and electric cars and all of this sort of stuff. And because the king has sort of got involved with the World Economic Forum and the think tank that is, one is slightly worried whether as he's king now, but when he makes that oath, whether his allegiance is still with the country and the people, and whether that oath cements that for us, the people, or whether he can still even though he's not supposed to. And I have to be careful how I do this because I don't want to have my head chopped off for treason or anything. But
No, I think it'll be YouTube that does it more.
yeah, yeah, that's very true. But how that works, I mean, I don't know how the oath works in practical terms. I just was going to. I mean, you've written a book about it, so I didn't know whether you had any insider knowledge on that.
No, I remember that, there was, if I can use this as an example, I remember that in UKIP, when I was in UKIP, a lot of people who were very hostile to the monarchy under Elizabeth II, not because they were anti-monarchists actually, but because they felt she had an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United Kingdom. And basically, they thought that she had not done that by allowing us to go into the EU. I think it's a similar kind of argument in a way. The difference there, I would say, is that the idea that she, as the monarch, could actually have overturned some sort of decision about the EU is just fanciful thinking. For the simple reason that the Tories had put it into their manifesto,
Right.
It would be 1970, Edward Heath, we will take Britain into the EU. And so that would be a way around it. I think that Charles, I think he is a patriot. I don't, and I just say, look, I'm a monarchist through and through, but I don't like the way some things are panning out. I don't like the kind of wokeification of the monarchy, especially. Particularly, we had a recent example of a lady in waiting, being dismissed almost without argument over, a perceived racist slight. That, for me, tested my loyalty, I have to say, because I thought, you have taken this entire thing on board. You have taken on board the whole kind of critical race theory thing. And Lady Susan Hussey was summarily dismissed. And I thought, wait a minute, you've entered the culture wars, actually.
Yes.
You, the monarchy, that's the last place they should be. It's the last place. They should be a unifying institution. I would say just about the last unifying one we have, actually. So I think that, yes, Charles is a patriot. World Economic Forum, I don't, he went and spoke, but I mean, does that mean he's a puppet of it or what? I don't know about that, Richard. I mean,
okay.
I tend not to think so. I think that all that Charles has got is a kind of naivety, maybe, a well-meaning naivety. But I think that the position of the monarchy and the importance of it as a unifying force in the country must never be threatened from within inside the monarchy. And I think that is one of the reasons I felt so affronted by what happened with the lady in waiting.
So as we've been discussing there, then the hollowing out of our culture and the worry that even it's affecting the royal family, which is a big thing. Peter, we're sort of coming to the end. I want to, before we go, just give people an opportunity to find out a little bit about the New Culture Forum. We spoke about the wonderful show, What You're Saying Is. What can we expect from you in the next few months?
Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it, Richard. Really have. Well, we have my interview program that will be going on, but we also have a discussion program called Newspeak, and that's weekly. But we do documentaries, and we do a documentary series called Heresies. Now, for example, this coming Sunday, we've got one coming out which is all about young people who don't go along with the whole woke message.
That sounds positive.
Well, it does. It absolutely. The people who basically, as I think I mentioned earlier, who essentially are very good, independent-minded young people who've managed to slip through the net of indoctrination Basically, the documentary is sort of looking at, you know, how do you manage to survive in this woke world, you know?
Hmm.
So that's coming out. We've also got a new program, which is called Deprogrammed, starting this month, my God, February, yes.
Yeah.
Basically, which is three young people presenting it. When I say young, I mean in their 20s, which, of course, to me
It's
is
young.
hugely young.
It's young to me.
But also, we have a six-part series called The West, which is going to be premiering in March. And very, very pleased to plug that because YouTube, you know, we in the past we had Kenneth Cock and Civilization on the BBC. You're never going to get that now. So it's fallen to us to really do it. But New Culture Forum, please go to our website. It's very self-explanatory. All our programs are there, but we also now have local uh, branches. Is putting it a little too strong, but we have local groups around the country of like-minded people, and we're going to be holding local events throughout. So I would say, please join up, become a
Hmm.
member, and then you'll get notification of all of these things happening. Our first one is actually in Southend in a few weeks' time.
Brilliant. Well,
Yeah.
Peter, it's been wonderful to talk to you, and I really admire what you've been doing because I used to watch BBC Two and all those sort of cultural programs to find out what the shows that I could never afford to go and see and find and those sort of people, and that's what you're doing in a very big way. And also, of course, you're talking about all some of the problems that we have in the country in that area, and we've talked about that today. I really appreciate your time. And
Thank you very much for having me on. Which I mean, it's amazing what's happened with your channel.
yes, yes, the channel seems, and I'm hoping that people will, not just go for the big sensational stuff that we often talk about, but more, the importance of our culture, which is you've said, to me is what if we can, it's the heartbeat and it's the blood, isn't it, of our nation, and we must remember that and promote that, not just have knee-jerk reactions to news stories. But Peter, thank you so much,
Thank
and
you.
check out the New Culture Forum.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Bye.